Iran Illuminated. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the program. I'm Hassan Syria. Iran's nuclear program did not start in 1979 after the Islamic Revolution. In fact, it dates back to the 1960s, 1967 to be exact, when the American and British installed dictator, the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was gifted Iran's first nuclear research reactor, including the highly enriched uranium fuel required for the facility. The Shah, being one of the eminent and crucial partners for the United States in Asia, was also the biggest buyer of military hardware during this period. Iran's foray into the world of nuclear science, therefore, came at the hands of the United States under American President Dwight Eisenhower's so-called Atoms for Peace program. In an attempt to shift the focus away from Washington's own proliferation of atomic weapons, Eisenhower believed that sharing nuclear know-how for peaceful means, such as for training, medicine, and energy production with its allies and proxies, would prevent a nuclear arms race. But from the early days, the United States and the West were wary of the potential that the knowledge and technology that they were transferring could be used for nuclear proliferation and the eventual development of atomic weapons. The Shah was a likely candidate. Proud and ambitious, his rule grew increasingly more authoritarian and brutal, and military spend continued to dominate. By the end of the 1960s, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, therefore, came into being. The Shah's Iran, having been granted access to nuclear technology, was among the original signatories to the treaty. The spark set by the Americans in the 1960s only aroused the Shah's appetite further. By the early 1970s, Iran was actively pursuing a nuclear program with an ambitious plan to build some 20 nuclear reactors for generation of electricity. Deals were struck with Germany and France, with Berlin commissioned to build the first reactor at Bushehr. With the French, the Shah went even further, expressing an initial intent for 5 nuclear reactors, sharing of knowledge, and even an Iranian loan to the French. The deal as it played out included the training of Iranians and the establishment of the Nuclear Research and Development Center in the city of Isfahan by 1975. At the request of the French, Iran agreed to invest $1 billion in a French enrichment facility. This effectively gave Imperial Iran a 10% stake in the French company. This would in turn allow Iran to purchase enriched uranium from the French while sharing nuclear know-how. The Iranian-French relationship was so prosperous that by the latter part of the decade, France had undertaken to install 10 nuclear facilities for the Iranians. But by 1978, as the Shah's dictatorial regime faced increasing public anger and revolt, the last Prime Minister under the Shah, Shapur Bakhtiyar, announced the suspension of nuclear contracts in a 4-line note to the French embassy in Tehran, seemingly without taking into account the legal repercussions of the decision. By early 1979, the Islamic Revolution had taken place. Unlike the Shah, which acted under the tutelage of the Americans, the new popular-led system in Iran was decidedly wary of America and Britain, mindful of their notorious historical role in Iran. France and Germany halted their cooperation with the newly formed Islamic Republic, refusing to satisfy the agreements of their contracts. France also became embroiled in the Iraqi war on Iran by supporting Saddam Hussein. The disputes over the French obligation to Tehran would then continue until the 1990s, when Iran was eventually granted victory and France had to pay a sum of $1.6 billion back to the Islamic Republic. But now that Iran had moved out of America's orbit, together with its European cohorts, it began suggesting that the Islamic Republic was pursuing a policy of nuclear proliferation, not for peaceful energy purposes, but potentially for the building of weapons. No evidence was ever supplied. The 1980s were years of great learning for the Islamic Republic. Facing global isolation, sanctions and a war waged by Iraq but supported by nations around the world, Iran learned that if it wanted to prosper, it would have to look inward. Any development would have to take place indigenously. Under the Shah's plan, Iran should have been generating over 20 megawatts of electricity from nuclear sources by 1994. That meant it should have had some 20 reactors in operation by then. But due to the setback of the Europeans refusing to honor their commitments to Iran, the nation focused on developing its own scientific knowledge domestically. Eventually, an agreement was reached with Russia to complete the development of the Bushehr nuclear reactor. That development itself was subject to repeated delays, with the Russians equally engaging in a game of diplomatic roulette, using sanctions and other pretexts for repeatedly halting work at the facility and as leverage against Iran. Eventually, Bushehr came online in 2011. That's more than a decade later than it was supposed to have begun feeding electricity into the Iranian grid. Operating in a hostile world, mindful of the Iraqi war on Iran, which dragged on for 8 years and in which no country would support Iran, while instead they armed Saddam Hussein's Iraq, pressured by the broad-scale sanctions and operating in an environment of general suspicion, the Islamic Republic of Iran therefore began developing its own industries. Promoting education, it propelled the national literacy rate, which emphasized self-sufficiency. From medicine to industrial production, food security, automotive development to military hardware, the Islamic Republic of Iran was now focused on its own growth. Some of it was happening at a public level, while others protectively happened in secrecy. But even during this period, Iran would not be left alone. Sanctions targeting through diplomatic channels such as the United Nations, claims of human rights abuses and even continued acts of terror against Iran through groups such as the Mujahideen Khalq or MKO would continue. By the 1990s, it was Israel, under its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who would launch a sustained campaign to claim that Iran is developing a nuclear weapon.
Benjamin Netanyahu armed himself with a simple cartoon to illustrate how...
Before they get enough enriched uranium
to develop nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons. Many nuclear bombs. An entire nuclear arsenal. A lot of bombs simultaneously.
9 atom bombs. 9.
The warhead
Could be a year. It could be...
Here's the bomb.
Within a few months.
Why do you need to enrich uranium? Iran should not have any capacity to enrich. There's no right to enrich.
Be the first to achieve nuclear weapons is Iraq and Iran.
Nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
As Netanyahu escalated his campaign, 2002 proved the year of a seeming breakthrough for the West in their vendetta against Iran. From Washington, a group calling itself the Iranian Government in Exile, which in effect was nothing more than an organ of the terror group, the MKO, funded and backed by the West, held a groundbreaking press conference.
Today I'm going to reveal to you 2 top secret sites of the Iranian regime. One of these 2 top secret projects is a project in the city of Natanz. The second project, the Iraq top secret project, this is a heavy water project and is seen as a top secret project within the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran.
But the intelligence revealing the existence of the Natanz and Arak nuclear facilities did not come from research of the MKO group itself. Instead, that information was fed to it by its handler Israel, and the briefing was strategically set in the United States. The MKO itself enjoys no popular mass support in Iran, having killed thousands of Iranians in bombings and other attacks after the Islamic Revolution. For decades, it operated from the Iraqi border as a cult and now has a presence in pockets of Europe. Its main leader, Masoud Rajavi, who was last seen in 2003, is long suspected to have perished. His wife, Mariam, is now presented as the face of the grouping. The MKO claims in the press conference, which came through Israel, introduced a new era for pursuing Iran. Resolutions were passed at the United Nations Security Council, sanctions were imposed, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, began pushing for access to the sites. Iran eventually voluntarily offered access to the IAEA inspectors. While going a step further, it allowed the agency 24-hour monitoring of its facilities via CCTV camera. The Islamic Republic wanted to demonstrate that while it had secret facilities, these were for peaceful purposes and not to build a weapon. In the years that came, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, issued an edict declaring the development or use of weapons of indiscriminate and mass-scale destruction as illegal within his assessment of the Islamic texts. According to Shia interpretation of a fatwa or an edict of a scholar of the status of Sayyid Khamenei, this effectively means that Iran could not pursue development of a nuclear weapon. But even a declaration at this level would not halt the Israeli and Western campaign against Iran. Always open to diplomatic engagement, by 2013, Iran, with a new government elected into office, embarked on talks with a view to settling the nuclear issue. They engaged the 5 permanent members of the Security Council as well as Germany. After some 20 months of negotiations, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, was signed. The nuclear deal, as it was called, was exhaustively comprehensive. Iran made major concessions. It brought down enrichment to just 3.67%. It took offline a substantial amount of centrifuges. It shipped to Russia a sizable quantity of its enriched uranium, all while allowing full access to its facilities and 24-hour monitoring. It even allowed a so-called snapback mechanism in which the Western parties to the agreement could reimpose sanctions on Iran if it was found to have not been upholding its obligations under the JCPOA.
Nuclear weapons use uranium enriched up to about 90% uranium-235. We are dramatically restricting the amount of enriched uranium that they can have on hand. Iran will reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium by 98%, from 12,000 kilograms to only 300 kilograms. Iran will reduce the number of centrifuges enriching uranium to just over 5,000 for the next decade, from almost 20,000 today. And for the next 10 years, only the oldest and least capable model of centrifuges will be allowed to operate. Iran has agreed to extraordinary transparency and verification. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, is the premier organization in the world for detecting and monitoring nuclear activity in all the countries that have signed up to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. At declared sites, inspectors will have regular access with as little as 2 hours' notice. International inspectors will have access not just to enrichment facilities, but also to the full uranium supply chain, from mines to centrifuge manufacturing and operation. And this access to the uranium supply chain comes with a 25-year commitment. To evade detection, Iran would need to successfully hide an entire supply chain, and that would be an extremely risky and difficult undertaking. At undeclared sites, suspected of nuclear activity, inspectors would have access in as few as 24 hours.
But as the JCPOA was being implemented, and despite failures by the Europeans to meet their commitments of the agreement, Donald Trump took office in the United States. With Israel's continued opposition to the nuclear deal, he promptly left the JCPOA, or the nuclear agreement, and pursued a policy of maximum pressure, further intensifying and broadening sanctions against Iran. After some 2 years of continued steps of pressure and escalation, and despite fervent efforts by Iran to salvage the deal, Iran threatened to begin its own escalation. It eventually began enriching uranium beyond the agreed limit and resuming its work at nuclear plants. The hope was to apply pressure so that either Europe or America would demonstrate a serious effort to find a diplomatic solution. But that would not be. By June of 2025, when Iran entered indirect talks with Washington while still in the midst of negotiations, America's main ally, Israel, launched a war on Iran. America itself had given the green light for the attack, and Washington rounded off the aggression by striking 3 of Iran's prominent nuclear facilities. The launch of a second war on Iran in February of 2026, again while negotiations were underway, has only intensified the situation. But after some 40 days of attacks, and with Iran being widely viewed as the victor with tangible leverage, Iran is now looking at its nuclear rights differently.
The problem is that the Americans are making excessive demands. They are asking for a very long suspension of the Iranian enrichment program, and they want to remove the enriched uranium of Iran, both of which are the rights that the NPT and the IAEA have, even a country which is signatory to its treaties. So as a member to the NPT, Iran has the right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes, and has the right to enrich uranium and keep the stockpile of the enriched uranium. So Iran is defending its rights, and the Americans on the other side want to impose something on Iran, and that's something that Iran would not accept.
Iran is also using its 60% enriched uranium reserve as a bargaining chip and a measure of deterrence. The uranium poses no military threat. For that, it should have to be enriched to 90% capacity. The reality is that the NPT does not stipulate limits on enrichment, and Iran, now in a stronger position, is effectively asserting that enrichment, nuclear research for energy, medical and other civilian reasons is fully within its rights. It's been here before. It engaged, it acquiesced, it limited its enrichment, it shipped out its vital resources, but now it will no longer stand for that. This is Iran Illuminated from me, Hassan Syria. Assalamu alaikum.